What happens when an entitled duchess meets a host who refuses to play along with royal treatment? Well, buckle up, because what you're about to witness is one of the most explosive talk show moments in recent memory. When Meghan Markle appeared on the Kelly Clarkson Show, nobody expected the interview to spiral into complete chaos, but sometimes the mask slips when you least expect it. Make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because this story will leave you speechless. The studio lights were bright as Kelly Clarkson adjusted her cards, preparing for what her producers had promised would be a feel-good interview. Meghan Markle sat across from her, perfectly poised in a cream-colored blazer, her trademark smile firmly in place. The audience had been warmed up, cameras were rolling, and everything seemed picture-perfect. "Welcome back to the show," Kelly began with her characteristic warmth. "I'm here with Meghan Markle, and we're going to talk about her new projects, her life, and everything in between. Meghan, thank you so much for being here." "Thank you for having me, Kelly. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she'd perfected over years of public appearances. Kelly glanced at her notes, then back at her guest. "So, you've been incredibly busy lately. Tell us about your latest ventures and what's keeping you motivated." Meghan's eyes lit up, and she leaned forward slightly. "Well, Kelly, I've been working on several passion projects that are really close to my heart. There's this incredible initiative I'm launching that focuses on empowering women globally. And I truly believe that when we lift each other up, we create ripples of change that can transform entire communities." "That sounds wonderful," Kelly responded, though something in her tone suggested she was already sensing the practiced nature of the response. "Can you tell us more specifically about what this initiative actually does?" There was the briefest pause, almost imperceptible, before Meghan continued. "It's about creating authentic connections and providing platforms for voices that haven't been heard. I've learned so much about the power of storytelling and how important it is to share our truths." Kelly nodded slowly, her experienced interviewer instincts picking up on the vagueness. "Right, but what does that look like in practice? Are you funding specific programs, working with existing organizations, or—" "We're in the development phase," Meghan said, her smile never wavering but her shoulders tensing slightly. "But I can tell you that the response has been overwhelming. People are hungry for authentic leadership, and I think my unique perspective brings something special to this space." "Your unique perspective?" Kelly repeated, her tone neutral but her eyes sharpening. "You've certainly had a unique journey. From actress to royal family member to, well, where you are now. That's quite a transformation." "Every experience has shaped me," Meghan replied, her voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. "I've learned that when you're in the public eye, people will always have opinions, but what matters is staying true to your values and your mission." Kelly leaned back in her chair, studying her guest. "Speaking of being in the public eye, you've been pretty vocal about your experiences. Some people love your openness. Others think they think you complain a lot. How do you handle that criticism?" The studio audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere. Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment before returning full force. "I think it's interesting that when women, particularly women of color, speak their truth, it's often labeled as complaining." "I've never complained, Kelly. I've shared my experiences, and I think that's important." "I didn't say you were complaining," Kelly clarified, her voice steady. "I said some people think you do. There's a difference. But since you brought it up, do you think maybe sometimes the way you share those experiences comes across as, a bit entitled?" The word hung in the air like a live wire. Meghan's posture straightened, and her carefully maintained composure showed the first real crack. "Entitled? That's an interesting word choice, Kelly. I'm curious what you mean by that." Kelly didn't back down. "Well, you've had opportunities that most people can only dream of. You married into one of the most famous families in the world, lived in actual palaces, had access to resources most of us can't imagine. And then when things got tough, you walked away and have been pretty critical of the institution that gave you that platform. Some people might see that as, having your cake and eating it too." "That's a gross oversimplification," Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly. "You have no idea what I went through, what that family put me through. The isolation, the racism, the complete lack of support when I was struggling with my mental health." "I'm not dismissing your struggles," Kelly said firmly. "Mental health is incredibly important, and racism is real and harmful. But you've also built a brand around those struggles, haven't you? Netflix deals, book deals, speaking engagements." You've monetized your pain, and that's fine, but let's call it what it is. Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. How dare you suggest that I've monetized my pain? I've used my platform to help others, to shine a light on important issues. Just because I found ways to support myself and my family doesn't mean I'm exploiting anything. Support yourself? Kelly pressed. Meghan, you're worth millions. Your husband is worth millions. You live in a mansion in California. I'm not saying you don't have the right to make money, but calling it supporting yourself feels a bit disingenuous. The audience was completely silent now, the tension palpable. Meghan's media training was clearly battling with her genuine emotions, and the cracks were starting to show more clearly. You don't understand the pressures I've been under, Meghan said, her voice tight. The constant scrutiny, the lies in the media, the way they've tried to destroy my reputation. I've had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. From scratch? Kelly's eyebrows rose. You had connections, resources, a global platform. Most people who rebuild their lives don't have Netflix executives on speed dial. That's not fair, Meghan shot back. You're twisting everything I say. I've worked hard for everything I have. I've earned my success. Kelly leaned forward, her tone becoming more direct. I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking direct questions, and you're getting defensive. Which, honestly, kind of proves the point about entitlement. When you're used to everyone agreeing with you, basic questions feel like attacks. Meghan's face flushed with color, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. The woman who had sat down with perfect poise was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked genuinely rattled. You invited me here under false pretenses, Meghan said, her voice shaking slightly. I thought this was going to be a respectful conversation about my work, not some ambush interview designed to make me look bad. I invited you here to have a conversation, Kelly replied calmly. A real one. Not a press release disguised as an interview. And if asking honest questions makes you feel ambushed, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. The cameras continued rolling as the two women stared at each other across the coffee table, the air thick with tension. What had started as a routine publicity appearance was rapidly becoming something much more explosive, and everyone in the studio could feel that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The silence stretched between them, but Kelly wasn't finished. She had clearly decided that this interview was going to be different from the usual softball questions Meghan was accustomed to receiving. You know what I find interesting? Kelly continued, her voice calm but pointed. You talk a lot about authenticity and truth, but you've never really addressed the elephant in the room. Your relationship with Harry, the timing of everything, the way it all played out. Some people think it was calculated from the very beginning. Meghan's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked. Excuse me? Are you seriously questioning my marriage right now? I'm questioning the narrative, Kelly replied evenly. You met Harry, and within 2 years you were married, had convinced him to leave his family, his country, his entire life behind. That's pretty impressive influence for someone who claims she didn't know what she was getting into. That is completely out of line. Meghan snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. Harry made his own choices. I never forced him to do anything. How dare you suggest that I manipulated him? Kelly shrugged, completely unbothered by the outburst. I didn't say you manipulated him. I said you had impressive influence. But your reaction is pretty telling. Why are you so angry about a simple observation? Because it's not a simple observation. It's a character assassination. Meghan shot back, her voice rising. You're sitting here implying that I'm some sort of gold digger or social climber who trapped a prince. That's disgusting. Those are your words, not mine, Kelly pointed out. I'm just noting that the timeline was pretty convenient. American actress meets prince, gets him to abandon his royal duties, moves to California where she can pursue her Hollywood dreams again. From the outside, it looks like a pretty good deal for you. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not going to sit here and let you insult my marriage and my character. This is supposed to be a talk show, not a trial. Sit down, Meghan, Kelly said firmly, not raising her voice but using a tone that broke no argument. You agreed to come on this show. You don't get to storm off just because you don't like the questions. Watch me, Meghan replied. But she remained standing, clearly torn between her desire to leave and her understanding of how bad it would look. Kelly leaned back in her chair, studying her guest with an almost clinical interest. You know what's fascinating? You've spent years talking about how the media mistreated you, how you were bullied and attacked. But the moment someone asks you direct questions, you completely fall apart. Maybe the problem wasn't the questions. Maybe the problem was that you couldn't handle any pushback at all. I can handle pushback, Meghan said through gritted teeth, finally sitting back down but perching on the edge of her chair like she was ready to bolt. What I can't handle is deliberate misrepresentation of my life and my choices. Nothing I've said is misrepresentation, Kelly countered. I've stated facts and asked questions. If that feels like an attack, maybe you should examine why. Facts? Meghan laughed bitterly. You're twisting everything to fit your narrative. Harry and I fell in love. We built a life together. We made difficult choices to protect our family. There's nothing calculated about that. Protect your family from what exactly? Kelly pressed. From royal duties? From public service? From the institution that made you famous in the first place? From racism? From harassment? From a system that was never going to accept me? Meghan replied, her voice shaking with emotion. You have no idea what it's like to be treated as an outsider, to have every move scrutinized, to be blamed for everything that goes wrong. Kelly's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. You're right. I don't know what that's like. But I do know what it's like to be criticized, to have people question your motives, to face public scrutiny. And you know what I learned? Sometimes the criticism is unfair, but sometimes it's valid. The difference is being able to tell which is which. So you think the criticism of me is valid? Meghan asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I think some of it is, Kelly replied without hesitation. I think you came into a situation with certain expectations, and when reality didn't match those expectations, you blamed everyone else instead of adjusting your approach. That's not true, Meghan protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Kelly challenged. You wanted to be a royal, but you also wanted to maintain your independence. You wanted the platform and the prestige, but you didn't want the restrictions. You wanted to modernize the monarchy, but you weren't willing to work within the system to make changes. Instead, you just left and took Harry with you. I didn't take Harry anywhere, Meghan said, her voice rising again. He chose to leave. He chose to prioritize his family over an institution that was damaging his mental health too. His mental health was fine before he met you, Kelly observed bluntly. He had his struggles, sure, but he was functioning. He had relationships with his family, his friends, his charities. Now he's isolated in California, estranged from his father and brother, dependent on you for his social circle and his sense of purpose. That's not healthy growth, that's dependency. The words hit like a physical blow. Meghan's face went pale, then flushed red. You don't know anything about our relationship or Harry's well-being. You're making assumptions based on gossip and tabloid stories. I'm making observations based on what I can see, Kelly replied calmly. A man who used to be close to his family is now completely cut off from them. A man who had lifelong friendships has seemingly replaced them all with your friends. A man who is passionate about military service and British charities is now making podcasts and Netflix shows. That's not evolution, that's transformation, and not necessarily a positive one. Harry is happier than he's ever been, Meghan insisted, but her voice was shaky. Is he? Kelly asked. Because from where I'm sitting, he looks like a man who's lost his identity. He went from being Prince Harry to being Meghan Markle's husband. And maybe that's what he wanted. But it's also possible that he didn't realize what he was giving up until it was too late. You have no right to psychoanalyze my husband? Meghan said, her composure completely gone now. You don't know him. You don't know us. You're just another person who's been fed lies by the British press. Actually, I haven't been fed anything, Kelly replied. I've watched your interviews, read your statements, observed your behavior. And what I see is someone who talks a lot about compassion and understanding, but shows very little of it when people don't agree with her. Someone who claims to want privacy but can't stop talking to the media. Someone who says she values family but has cut off both her own family and her husband's family. That's enough, Meghan said, standing up again. I'm done with this character assassination. This isn't journalism, it's harassment. Sit down, Kelly said again, her voice harder this time. You came here to promote yourself and your projects. You wanted a platform. Well, this is what a platform looks like when it's not controlled by your PR team. Real questions, real pushback, real consequences for your choices. Meghan remained standing, her hands shaking slightly. I don't have to tolerate this abuse. It's not abuse, it's accountability, Kelly shot back. And the fact that you can't tell the difference is exactly the problem. You've surrounded yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear, and now when someone doesn't, you call it abuse. That's not healthy, Meghan. That's not growth. The studio audience was completely silent, watching this unprecedented breakdown of a carefully constructed public image. Cameras continued rolling as Meghan struggled to regain her composure, the mask of perfection she'd worn for years finally slipping away completely. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Meghan stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't supposed to go this way. This was supposed to be easy, controlled, safe. "You know what your real problem is?" Kelly continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You thought you could come in here and give me the same rehearsed answers you give everyone else. You thought I'd be starstruck, that I'd treat you like royalty just because you married into it. But I'm not impressed by titles or designer clothes or carefully crafted victim narratives." "I never asked you to be impressed," Meghan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, but you expected it," Kelly replied. "You expected deference. You expected softball questions about your projects and your philanthropy and your journey. You didn't expect to be challenged on your choices, your motives, or your impact on the people around you." Meghan finally sat back down, but she looked defeated, smaller somehow than she had when the interview began. "What do you want me to say, Kelly? That I'm a terrible person? That I ruined Harry's life? That I'm everything the tabloids say I am?" "I want you to be honest," Kelly said simply. "For once, just be honest. Not with me, not with the audience, but with yourself. Do you really believe that your version of events is the whole truth? Do you really think you bear no responsibility for how your relationships have played out?" There was a long pause. Meghan stared at her hands, her perfectly manicured fingers twisting together. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like rage. "You want honesty?" Meghan said, her voice suddenly stronger. "Fine, here's honesty. I was never going to be good enough for them. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I was always going to be the outsider, the American, the actress, the divorced one. They made up their minds about me before they even met me." "Maybe," Kelly acknowledged, "but that doesn't explain why you've cut off your own family. That doesn't explain why you've isolated Harry from his friends. That doesn't explain why you seem incapable of maintaining any relationship that doesn't revolve around you." "That's not true," Meghan protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Kelly pressed. "When was the last time Harry saw his old friends without you? When was the last time he made a decision about his career, his charities, his public appearances without your input? When was the last time he seemed genuinely happy instead of just going through the motions?" "He's happy," Meghan repeated, but it sounded more like she was trying to convince herself. "He's compliant," Kelly corrected. "There's a difference. A happy person doesn't need to constantly justify their choices. A happy person doesn't look like they're walking on eggshells around their spouse. A happy person doesn't abandon everything they once cared about for someone else's vision of their life." "You're twisting everything," Meghan said, but the fire had gone out of her voice. "You're making it sound like I'm some kind of controlling monster." "I'm not making it sound like anything," Kelly replied. "I'm asking questions and letting you provide the answers. The fact that you're hearing control and manipulation in those questions says more about you than it does about me." Meghan was quiet for a long moment, staring off into the distance. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. "Do you know what it's like to have everyone hate you? To have every single thing you do criticized and dissected and turned into evidence of your character flaws?" "Actually, I do," Kelly said, her tone softening slightly. "I've been in this business for decades. I've made mistakes, faced backlash, had people question my motives and my character. But you know what I learned? Sometimes the criticism is unfair, but sometimes it's a mirror. And if you're brave enough to look in that mirror, really look, you might see something that helps you grow." "And what am I supposed to see?" Meghan asked, her voice breaking slightly. "A woman who's so afraid of being rejected that she rejects everyone else first," Kelly said quietly. "A woman who's so desperate to be seen as perfect that she can't acknowledge her own flaws. A woman who's so focused on being right that she's forgotten how to be kind." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Meghan's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like a lost child rather than a polished public figure. "That's not who I am," she whispered. "Maybe not," Kelly said gently, "but it's who you've become. And the tragedy is that you had the power to be so much more. You had a platform, resources, influence. You could have made a real difference. Instead, you've spent years fighting battles that mostly exist in your own head. I tried to make a difference, Meghan said, her voice barely audible. No, you tried to make a point, Kelly corrected. You tried to prove that you were right and they were wrong. You tried to win. But real change doesn't come from winning. It comes from understanding, from compromise, from building bridges instead of burning them. Meghan looked up at Kelly, her eyes red and watery. So, what am I supposed to do now? How do I fix this? Start by admitting that you played a role in creating this situation, Kelly said. Stop blaming everyone else for your choices. Take responsibility for the relationships you've damaged, the opportunities you've wasted, the pain you've caused. Not because you're a terrible person, but because you're human, and humans make mistakes. And if I do that, Meghan asked? If I admit that I was wrong about some things, if I take responsibility, what then? Then maybe you can start rebuilding, Kelly replied. Maybe you can repair some of those relationships. Maybe you can find a way to use your platform for something other than settling scores. Maybe you can become the person you always claimed to be, instead of the person you've allowed yourself to become. Meghan was quiet for a long time, tears streaming down her face. The studio was completely silent except for the hum of the cameras and the barely audible sound of her breathing. Finally, she looked up at Kelly, her mascara smudged but her eyes clearer than they'd been all day. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to stop being defensive, how to stop feeling like everyone's against me. Start small, Kelly said. Start with one relationship, one conversation, one moment of genuine vulnerability. Stop trying to control the narrative and start trying to understand it. Stop trying to be right and start trying to be better. What if it's too late? Meghan asked. What if I've burned too many bridges, hurt too many people? It's never too late to try, Kelly replied. But it has to be genuine. It has to be about actually changing, not just changing your image. People can tell the difference. Meghan nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're strong enough to survive everything you've been through, Kelly said. You're strong enough to build a life in a new country, to stand up to one of the most powerful families in the world, to create a brand and a career from nothing. You're definitely strong enough to take an honest look at yourself and make some changes. For the first time since the interview began, Meghan smiled, and it looked genuine. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't think I've ever had anyone talk to me like this before. Like what? Kelly asked. Like I'm a real person instead of a character in a story? Meghan replied. Like my choices matter, like I have the power to change things. You do have that power, Kelly said. You've always had it. The question is what you're going to do with it. The interview ended there, with Meghan sitting quietly, lost in thought, and Kelly watching her with something that might have been hope. The cameras stopped rolling, but the impact of what had just happened would reverberate far beyond the studio walls. So what do you think? Was this the wake-up call Meghan needed, or was it too little too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that show you what really happens when the cameras are rolling and the masks come off.